Welcome to The Pestle, reviewing and breaking down movies to look for insights into the movie-making process. Hosted by The Dollar Menu. Nothing says bargain like chemicals pretending to be food. Now let's dim the lights and start the show.
Welcome to The Pestle. Today's show is brought to you by Schrute Farms. You can't beat the beats at Schrute Farms. Welcome, everyone, to The Pestle. I am Wes.
And I'm Todd.
And this is the podcast where we like to analyze films from the standpoint of creatives, writers, filmmakers, editors, actors, grips, PAs. Like, we have worn pretty much every hat possible. And today we're going to be taking a look at, of course, the newest from Christopher Nolan. But the reason I'm kind of jumping the gun a little bit is because we've, for the last, 6 months, been kind of cooped up in our apartments. And this was my first time going back to a movie theater. And so I'm curious what that experience was like for you, Todd, being an avid moviegoer.
Oh, man, it was wondrous. It was glorious. No, it was, I guess a little scary, if I'm completely honest, just because I'd never, it had been months since I've gone to anywhere where there were multiple people in a confined, enclosed space. So in that respect, yeah, but not really, because it's been so many months, and the precautions that Alamo is taking going back were just fantastic. So I felt pretty comfortable. But it was just so good to be in that environment again, to be in a dark room with a big ass screen in front of me and a bowl of popcorn in front of me, or not a bowl. They do boxes now, just like whatever. Lame. It is a bit lame. Not going to lie, but I do appreciate the care with which they're coming back. They're coming back with there's buffer seats between groups, and you have to buy the food up front so that their staff aren't walking super close to people and having people whisper to them, like a ton in the middle of the movie. And you have to wear your mask, in between eating, and so it was good, but it was not the same, and I can't wait for it to get back to the same, hopefully eventually soon, but I know it's going to be a while. So yes, it was just good to be in a theater again, man.
No, really same. Like, it definitely wasn't the same, especially for me, because I didn't eat any food. I had to keep my mask on the whole time, which I gladly did. I mean, I guess they technically allowed people to take their mask off once they were in their seat, but I know enclosed spaces are kind of a high risk territory. And so I, happily kept my mask on. And I use happily in quotes because it was a safe thing to do, but I feel like I'm just struggling to breathe through it's fogging up. I don't know. It's uncomfortable. At most of the time I was able to kind of lose myself into the movie, but it was a certain level of discomfort because there's nothing like being able to take a nice full breath unencumbered.
Yeah.
But yeah. I also, so this is going to go really astray for the next 3 minutes, but I really, other than going to film that project in Seattle in June, I haven't really left my apartment almost at all, other than to go to the grocery store. And that's about it. I generally haven't been, as most people, I've been on lockdown. I'm not. And so I think going to the theater, and then a buddy invited me and a couple and another friend out to catch a Rockets game. So after the movie, not that same day, but a few days later, I was like, yeah, okay. It wasn't so bad last time. And my buddy's going through a hard time. I know he could probably use some company. And so we went out and enjoyed a night out. And I don't know if suddenly the world is losing its mind, but whenever we went to leave, I went to the parking lot and I got in my car, and I was kind of shoved up in the back corner of this parking lot. And I noticed behind me, and literally in the back corner, this is Austin. So houses run or turned into businesses. And this parking lot of this bar is clearly not the perfect parking lot. literally in the corner against a picket fence and some like railing or something, like, and I'm parked on grass. Like it's not even paved. And so it's a very odd place, not technically on the east side, but over off of near where you used to live on Manor, east of 35. Yeah. And so I look behind me and I'm like kind of hemmed in, and I'm waiting for this truck to clear, and I see he's reversing, and then there's another truck in front of him that's also reversing. They got the reverse lights on. So I'm thinking, okay, they're dealing with something. Probably someone's trying to get out, and they're trying to create space for whoever's trying to get out so that they can park or whatever. Parking is always a nightmare in Austin. And so I'm fine with that. I open my phone to load up my maps to make sure, I get home efficiently, not just so I know the directions, but Google will tell you, if there's a accident or whatever. And my phone is very old. It's a 6S iPhone. And so it takes forever to load. It's loading the map, and it's loading my podcast so that I can have all that ready to go before I ever, get on the road. I try to be a very responsible driver, not texting all that stuff. And so literally my phone takes several minutes to do all those things, for whatever reason.
Several minutes to do all those things?
It took like a couple minutes to do both of those things, to not just load the map, which it failed, and I had to kind of redo it. And then, once the map fully loads, then I got to say, okay, now go home, pull up my home address and start the directions. And while all this is happening, I'm noticing these cars still haven't moved. And so I throw on my reverse lights and just to signal like, hey, there's a car back here. My brake lights and whatever are working, but clearly they're not paying attention. So I throw on my reverse lights to indicate, hey, I'm trying to leave. And they back up closer to me. And I'm like, okay, what, and I finished loading my phone. And after a certain point, I'm like, this has been a couple minutes now. I'm ready to go now, guys. So I, give a light honk, like, hey, I'm back here, and they kind of start backing even closer to me. And I'm just like, what is going on? So I lay on it for, 2 or 3 seconds to be like, hey, no, for real. Like there's a car here. Let's get a move on. And then they pull up a little bit enough to kind of let me out. But they also block the pathway to the street. And so I waited, another minute or so. And at this point, I've been playing this game with these people for like 5 minutes, which in car time is about 7 years of your life. And so I honk again because literally now they're parked side by side in order to take up the entire aisle space that would require. And, they're still not moving. So I get out of my car and I'm like, yo, can y'all please move so that I can go home? And I'm getting back in my car. And I didn't scream it, but they're in their car. I say it loud enough and definitely agitated enough to, get the point across, like, what are we doing? Let's freaking go. And at this point, the entire world starts melting down. Like a woman gets out of one of the cars. There's an SUV or a truck. I'm not even sure. No, there were 2 SUVs that were parked next to each other, and they were parked next to a big dually, or they were waiting next to a parked dually. And so this woman gets out and she's like, starts yelling at me. And I'm like, yo, can you, move your car so I can please leave? And she's screaming like, no, we're not. You need to go that other way. And she starts pointing in the direction where these other 2 cars parked. And I'm like, I can't get out that way. There's literally cars right there. Like that's not an exit. And she keeps pointing like, you're just going to have to go. We're going to park here all damn night. And like, she just starts losing her mind. And I'm like, could you please just move your car so that I can go? Like, I don't understand what the hang up is. And a few seconds into this, the dually opens up and this woman hangs her head out of the passenger window and a guy opens his door and gets on his, 17-foot high monster pickup. And he starts losing his mind on a whole new level. Like he's screaming at the top of his lungs at me. He's yelling me to shut the F up, you stupid MFer. Like, he's just yelling and cursing me out, and he's saying he's going to beat my ass. And like, I don't even know if he understands what was happening in the first place. Like I just wanted them to move so I could leave. Like I'm not insulting their like lives or anything. Like this is very basic parking etiquette kind of stuff. And she's like, no, I'm going to park here all night. You're going to have to deal with it or, drive that other way. And I look around and there's this like house behind the bar. And I'm like, I don't think that this looks like a house to me. It doesn't look like it looks like a driveway because again, this is Austin. Like houses are next to businesses and this is like a nice kept lawn. It's literally a house. It doesn't look like a business. And so it just looks like a driveway into someone's house. And I'm like and she is just not listening to anything I'm trying to say. And I'm like, and this guy's over here yelling and everything in me wanted to like engage. But I'm like, I run through this, kind of cost analysis in my head of like, one, if you engage, what are you going to win here? Like nothing. Like for one, if you decide to get into a fight with this guy for, one, he looks like he's going to be tired just, kind of standing, like let alone, getting into an actual altercation. And so if you, for whatever stupid reason, get into a fight with this guy and you beat him up, you haven't won anything. Like you just beat up on a helpless idiot. And now you're going to go home and you're going to cry because you feel awful as a human being. And that's what I would do. I would like get into and then two, if you don't win and you lose to this guy, you're really going to cry.
Yeah. Then the story would take a much worse
really
story.
Badly. I mean, neither of these people look like they've ever, it's not good. These are not healthy looking individuals, either physically or mentally.
You're
very
PC.
Right. And then what if he has like a weapon? Like, am I going to fight a guy with a wrench or a knife or a gun? And no, because if I'm this guy and I see me walking up to me, I'm probably not going to want to fight that fairly. Like, me being 6'4", him being all of probably 5'5". This is just probably not going to go his direction. Like in every way, this guy didn't really understand the scenario. Not that I'm some brawler or anything, but whatever. Like just from
you could take him. I get it.
Yeah, I mean that's where my head goes, and so in no way was I going to win, and so I had to fight everything in me that wanted to engage back. And so I'm like, oh, okay, I get it. You're a big tough guy. And then I just kind of stopped talking to him and so finally I'm like, I guess I'm going to try this driveway just because this woman is screaming at the top of her lungs. And I don't know where this is going to go. No one else is getting out of the car. And there's clearly like several people. And I'm hoping someone in those cars is like, why are they so upset about a guy asking us to move? But probably not in all reality. And so I literally, in order to get out of this parking lot at this point, to get into this driveway, I have to perform like an 8-point turn. And I'm almost hitting cars around me. I'm almost hitting this fence, literally coming within because there's just no space, for me to maneuver. And while I'm doing this woman is like walking up to the car, screaming at the top of her lungs, "Yay, he gets it. Way to go." And like just being, as sarcastic as possible.
Oh my God, I would.
Dude, yeah, no, you would have. Anybody else in the car with me would have been a bad combination. And so it was just so weirdly aggressive. And I assume maybe they were coming out of the bar. I would hate to think they hadn't had their drinks yet because nothing good is coming after that. But it was just one of these moments where I'm driving home, and obviously this is the kind of thing that sticks with you for, a day or two. And I was just like, are people this wound up now where we don't know how to, it's already been bad. And I think for me, the worst part is I grew up in the country and I know country people. That's my family, and so I felt like these were kind of these wannabe rednecks. Like, I'll take you to see actual rednecks and we'll have a conversation there. Because this isn't what country people actually act like. You and your souped up dually and your fresh pressed Levi's or Wranglers or whatever, and you're just in boots, like this isn't country.
Yeah, it's rednecks with money.
Yeah, it's rednecks with money. Yeah.
Let me show you some real rednecks without any money.
They've been wearing their boots
sell
for
that
the last
dually in
8
a heartbeat
years.
and buy a 1984 Dodge Ram. You know, they get 7 miles to the gallon, guaranteed.
It was just mind blowing. Like I hope, and I don't expect this of our listeners. I feel like anybody who listens to us regularly probably has a bigger heart and more patience due to how much we ramble. But it was just one of those mind blowing moments that I'm like, man, I hope as you were saying, like you're excited to come back to, movies in normal mode. And I also hope that when we come back to the world, that we're also able to kind of interact with each other on those old normalities of basic parking lot etiquette.
I'm afraid that they're gone for a while, man.
It might be the case.
I don't think. First off, I'm sorry that happened. That sucks. You're a bigger man than I to handle it the way that you did. I personally would have lost my marbles, and then would have been upset that I lost my marbles. So
yeah, that's the weird thing. And I try to look back at it and say, how much of this was my fault? Like, how much did I contribute? And I'll definitely admit, like, I was agitated whenever I spoke to their cars because there was no one out. But I didn't like scream. I didn't curse at them at any point that I like curse at them. And I feel like agitation after several minutes of like trying to get their attention to, just pull up 10 feet. This isn't going to cost you anything. I felt like, yeah, I was a little agitated, but this is in foreign policy is what I would call a disproportionate response. And so, yeah. Anyway, so hopefully everyone is out there, going to see Tenet or anything else, and keeping, their be kind face on.
Yeah, I feel like that even when we're back, there's gonna be a lot of reacclimation, and stuff like, and also, not to get political, but if Trump wins again, the divisiveness is just going to continue. I mean, I'm not saying that it wouldn't continue, if Biden won, but I don't think it would to the extent that it has, now. I think it's like people are very polarized in every regard, and then and politics isn't politics anymore; it's personal. And when things like politics get personal, then everything gets personal. Then a parked car, then someone from a car asking someone else to move is a personal thing. It's like everything, it's like if everybody knew what everyone made, all of a sudden that personal thing, or how often everybody has sex, all of a sudden that personal thing is like public knowledge, and everyone is categorized. Oh, you're a Republican, you're a Democrat. Oh, you're parked in that spot and you're coming this way. No, I'm this way. Like everything is just like black and white instead of like a give and take. There's a gray area. I could have had some wrong. You had some wrong. We're working together. And I think that even when we come back, people have to get used to that again. And if they come back to a climate that is just as divisive as before, then it's just gonna continue. And I don't know what the answer is, other than to act how you acted, and which is so funny because I'm working on that myself. I have anger issues, admittedly, and I'm very quick when someone is angry at me to immediately respond with that same emotion, and I'm aware of it and trying to fix it. So that would have been a good practice for me that I would have failed probably slower than I would have maybe 6 months ago. So
hey, progress is progress, man.
Yeah, so you get 5 seconds instead of 0 for me to go from a 1 to a 9,
Well,
anyway,
at some point we can reverse the entropy and like, oh, well, I'll go back to that scenario and write it properly.
Perfect. I like it. So let's get down to it.
Indeed.
Before we start, I want to tell everybody, this is Tenet. This is Nolan's new film. We saw it before it was released. We were supposed to do this episode last week, and I had some personal things going on, so we weren't able to record, so we're doing it a week late. My apologies. However, if you haven't seen it, please pause this episode and go to, local theater. Make sure that you wear your mask, keep it on. And I think all theaters now, they have like this buffer seating, so you can go see it indoors and don't have to worry about too much. I mean, I saw it for a second time yesterday, and there were literally 5 people in the whole theater, so you can still see it. Anyway, so please pause the episode, go watch it, and then come back.
Agreed. Yeah, I saw it earlier today for the 3rd time, and I got to see it, and I'm pretty sure I was the only person in the theater, if not one in the very back. But I saw it at the Dolby. AMC has the Dolby theater, and it was the best sound system I've ever heard in a theater before in my life. It was incredible.
Wow.
Yeah, it was intense. Like, I don't know if we'll get into Tenet in a second. I don't know if you go back to see that again, but just sitting in that theater, definitely worth it to me. But we are going to talk about a lot of things regarding Tenet. We'll touch on cinematography, including like underexposing an actor. We'll also talk about writing and storytelling, and do some analysis of Christopher Nolan's goals, or what we perceive to be his goals in this film, along with creating a solvable puzzle and other such stuff and things and stuff.
Synopsis of the film. Okay. Fighting for the survival of the entire world, a protagonist journeys through a twilight world of international espionage on a mission that will unfold in something beyond real time. Written and directed by Christopher Nolan, cinematography by Hoyte van Hoytema, starring John David Washington as the protagonist, Robert Pattinson as Neil, Elizabeth Debicki as Kat, Kenneth Brannagh as Sator, Dimple Kapadia as Priya, and Aaron Taylor Johnson as Ives.
All I have for you is a word. Tenet. It'll open the right doors, some of the wrong ones too. Use it carefully.
To do what I do, I need some idea of the threat we face.
As I understand it, we're trying to prevent World War III.
I'm not saying Armageddon here.
No. Something worse.
I gather you have an interest in a certain Russian national.
Why don't you bring me in?
You really want to know? He can communicate with the future.
Time travel.
No. Inversion.
Aim it and pull the trigger. You're not shooting the bullet, you're catching it.
Whoa. Well, I've seen too much. Well, we'll try and keep up.
So, right off the bat, I guess, first impressions, what did you think walking out of this thing the first and
We're
the
going to
second
go straight
time?
into it, like, right into it. Yeah, so this is not a film that you can see once. That I don't think that anyone can see this film once and really, I mean, you can get the premise. That's easy. But really follow all the webs of everything to the point where you could actually critique it. Like there's no way. At least I can't see a way. So when we walked out of it, I was, I love anything Nolan. It's all larger than life. It's all like, edge of sci-fi kind of, stuff. And we love physics and science. And so we know about entropy and all that stuff. So it's all very interesting. So that keeps me glued to the screen like no other But this one was, I mean, I had so many holes. I couldn't even really formulate an opinion. I did go home and told my wife that this might be, you know, this might be my least favorite Nolan film, but that I needed to see it again to know. So gave it, you know, a couple weeks, and then I went and saw it again yesterday, and I gotta say, it's so much better the second time. I mean, I just knowing, you know, I don't know. I feel like knowing what I knew after seeing it the first time, seeing it again, just like I was able to process probably the same amount, but because I had already processed it once, I could process kind of, you know, the new amount that I didn't get before. And so I do have some issues with it, for sure, but I liked it so much more the second time. My brain was Swiss cheese after the first time. And then after this time, it was a lot of the holes were filled in, made a lot more sense. The timelines, made sense. Them going into the machine, like I missed it. And I think, I'll come to this in just a second as to why, but I missed, the explanation of you need to see yourself coming out of the machine before you get in, or else you never came out. Which was a huge deal. It was a huge deal for me, because then that made me really because everything happens so quickly that you forget that what you're like, for example, when they take Priya into the machine to go backwards in time to save her, right? That
Cat.
moment for me was did I say Priya?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sorry. When they take Kat into the machine to save her, but they see themselves coming out the other side, he's explaining, you got to see yourself coming out or you don't come out, right? To me, that was always a given that you would just come out. But so the idea of you have to see yourself made me really grasp in my brain space, the idea that everything on the other side that we're seeing being on this side is going backwards. Because it's one thing to just see it moving backwards. It's another thing to like experience the backwards movement, right? So while you're I needed to put my brain experience on the other side of the glass while in this side of the glass to really, really get everything, you know? So anyway, it allowed me to get a lot more out of it. And it was just so much better. So I would say to anybody, if you've seen this and you're not sure if you like it or not or whatever, just see it again. I really enjoyed it a whole lot more the second time. I think a third time I would enjoy it even more. That being said, it's not for everyone. I think that it'll probably go over the heads of 8 out of 10 people that see it. And not having anything to do with whether or not they know what entropy is. Yeah. But more to do with just being able to follow everything. And I think to get to my point that I said I was going to get to earlier, part of the problem that I had with seeing it the first time was, to be honest, seeing it in Alamo. Because one, there were more people there, but that's not the problem. The problem was really the sound. It just, this mix that a lot of times, like, they either had masks on or they were speaking so quickly, and their music was so loud in the mix that it was very hard to understand what they were saying. That whole interaction that happens in the beginning in the opera house, you never see his mouth move because he's got a mask on the whole time. You don't know who's who half the time. You know who he is because he's the only black guy, but you don't know who anybody else is. So you're just trying to catch up, and you're not allowed to catch up, and you're not even allowed to catch up with the dialogue. At least I wasn't, because I couldn't hear it. And I usually can hear, I pay attention and I can hear these things. So when I saw it the second time, I saw it just right at the street at this movie house and eatery, and the sound was just way better. I think, I'm not sure what the deal is in the Alamo, in that theater, I guess. I don't know, but the sound was just way better. I heard everything a lot better. Because I'd heard it before, I was able to listen a little bit more critically and pull out a few words that I probably wouldn't have, even if I would have seen it the first time there at the eatery. So, but yeah, so it was the sound and seeing it again. But also, man, the way that sometimes, okay. One of the things we love about Nolan, and I'm going on tirade, but F it, you go on tirades all the time. So, one of the things that we love about Nolan is that he treats us as a viewer as like we're going to get it, right? He's just understood we're going to get it. Don't spoon feed the watcher, the viewer. And I love that. I love that, especially about this movie. I love that you don't give me anything that I have to fight for it, because that's the kind of viewer that I am. That being said, I don't think that everybody is. I think that a lot of people, I think that more people than not are not that way. So I don't know how good this movie is going to do because of that. And I haven't looked at the numbers or anything, but some of the times in this film where he switches, like he will cut massive swaths of time out and explain nothing. He will go from one side of the planet to the other and explain nothing. It's just, you get nothing. You do get some exposition, and I think it's really well placed in a lot of points, and that's great. I think you need it, but like visually, I'm just completely uprooted, and I have to find my bearings again. And by the time I find my bearings, I'm uprooted again, and then I'm uprooted again. And then I have to remember being in this new scene, something that happened 5 scenes ago that led them to this scene. And so it's exhausting. So by, maybe with like 20 minutes left, I'm like, oh my God, okay, now I really got to pay attention, because now is the battle at the end, and I got to follow who's who, and Neil is going to switch sides. When does he switch sides? Do we see him switch sides? I've got to watch for him. But no, I need to follow the protagonist because I need to know, like what happens at the end with the guy in the hole, where he sees Neil dead. But it's just, stuff happens so fast. The camera work is so fast. The cuts are so fast, and the scene switching is so fast that it's really hard to follow. So I would say that you need at least 2, if not 3 viewings to really get it. And even at that, you might not like it, but at least you'll get it. Yeah. And I love that about Nolan, man. And I love that he will take a leap of faith on you as a viewer, and just do what he wants to do and put it out there. I think that, I think we talked about it, and I don't know if you still feel this way, but I think that he probably should have run this by his brother. The script, because his brother is unbelievable at like bringing the viewer along with you, as opposed to dragging them along. And that's what I felt like this movie did. It drug me along with it. Now I happily went, I was in chains being drugged, but I was walking briskly behind the carriage, pulling me. And I went, and I would go anywhere with you, Chris. Anywhere. Take me anywhere you want to go. I'm there. But just maybe in the next one, have your brother do a little bit of ghostwriting or just reviewing and whatever. And yeah. So it's my tirade. I'm sure you're going to go deeper on your end, but that's kind of the surface for me.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's hard to, because of all that confusion, it's impossible to enjoy the spectacle that he's presenting you, because you don't understand what's happening. And so you're never able to relax into it and appreciate it, because you're just spending so much time confused and trying to catch up. And that makes for a frustrating experience more than an enjoyable one, which sucks, because he is, so good at presenting these thoughtful, big budget masterpieces. But at the same time, I'm same with you, man. I'm glad that he takes those risks and believes in us, the viewer, enough to not, oversimplify or spoon feed us. This was I would rather him make that mistake than make the other mistake of doing too much and, treating us as children all the time. Unfortunately, every once in a while that's going to go awry. And this was his, 1 out of 10. Like, 10% of the time it goes wrong, I'm okay with that. That means, 90% of the time he's going to reward me for being thoughtful and for paying attention and coming along. Because one of the great things about Nolan films is it's going to work on 2 layers. The first layer, as a viewer, you're going to enjoy the story, the spectacle, and it's going to be very fun. And you're going to walk out of it with an experience that you got on a very basic level. And if you're more thoughtful, usually you can pull out deeper meanings and deeper layers from his storytelling. And here, those deeper layers are there, but unfortunately, they're so much further down because of how deep you already had to go just to appreciate the movie on a superficial level. And I'll definitely go into all of that here in a minute. But I had the same experience. Like, the second viewing was much, much better. It was so much easier to kind of follow along, but it wasn't until the third viewing that I could understand the final action sequence, which is the entire reason I went to see it the third time, because even during the second time, I couldn't remember who was inverted and who wasn't. And so I'm watching it and things are exploding and unexploding at the same time. And I'm like, I don't know who's doing what or why anyone's doing anything. Could we just start over again? And it's a lot to deal with. And this third time around, I was able to understand, okay, the blue team is inverted. And so every time I cut to and I see blue, and I had to train myself how to watch this movie. Every time I'm seeing blue, I'm watching this inverted. I'm watching it. And if it's a pincer move, and if you're not familiar with, Roman military tactics, a pincer move is kind of an ability or a tactic to pull the enemy back towards you, and you surround them and cut them off in the middle. And so it's a way to kind of cut them off from their supply, so to speak. And this is very bad military tactics on my part. I'm simplifying and screwing it up to some degree. But the general idea is you're attacking them. You're surrounding and attacking them from both sides in order to surround them and weaken their position. And so when you start thinking about it from a temporal level or time travel level, those 2 teams, the red team and blue team, are both attacking from a timeline, from 2 different timelines. Like, imagine the attack is at 10 o'clock. Well, the red team is starting, at 9:50, and the blue team is starting at 10:10, so to speak. And so because the blue team is inverted, they're going back through time to they're starting at 10:10 and experiencing 10:09, 10:08, 10:07, 10:06 because they're running backwards through time. And if you're watching that and not fully understanding that, the confusion ramps up so much more because you're watching things happen at the end of the battle. From the perspective of the blue team, though, that's the beginning of their battle. And so you have to understand what is happening based on who it's happening to. And if you can't understand that, it becomes impossible. It's absolutely impossible to appreciate why people are doing things. Like, why is Neil reversing course? Why is he going back from being inverted to, in proper time? And it's because he sees something while he's inverted that he knows, I need to take action right now, or else this mission is going to fail at its most critical, juncture. And
when we get to that ending, I have a big question for you.
Awesome. I am really looking forward to that.
I don't know. It might be a stupid question.
There in this movie, that does not exist. There are no stupid questions in this dojo. And so, yeah, let's kind of plow through. I have very little to talk about cinematography wise. It's obviously a very brown movie. It's a little contrasty, but it's not super contrasty. Not as much as you might think based on what you're looking at with John David Washington, the actor who plays the protagonist. Because to me, as a, let's call myself by comparison of Hoyte van Hoytema, an amateur. I'm an amateur by, comparison. And to me, it looks like this is poor exposure on John David Washington, the actor. He looks underexposed to me in a lot of scenes. Like, it's one thing to not be able to expose his beard because his beard is like jet black. And so it's really hard to see details on John David Washington's beard, but there's times when even his skin is underexposed. This is such a delicate thing to discuss because, John David Washington's black, and historically black people have been underexposed, not just from a cinematic standpoint, but even from a standpoint of having their film photographs developed at the local whatever photo store, the 1 hour shop, because of I think they were called Shirley cards that the photos, I'm completely losing what they're supposed to be called, but the developer usually is looking and comparing the exposure to a Shirley card, and this is kind of the way to exposure in a developer is based on timing, how long you leave something in. And so the developer is looking at a Shirley card as a reference point of, is the picture that I'm developing at proper exposure yet? And so if you're, for instance, shooting outside, the sky is supposed to be blue. And if they're looking at their card and trying to register the sky as their frame of reference, then they're going to make sure the sky is blue. Well, if you're black, your skin needs more reflectance and more exposure time in order to show up properly. And so if you're black taking a photograph, you're exposing for the skin tone, not for the sky. And that means whenever you take your picture, you're going to overexpose the sky a little bit. And then you go and take your photos to, the developer, and they, instead of exposing for the skin, they're using their Shirley card of a white girl, and they're setting the exposure to her instead of to a black person. And now their photographs, their portraits of themselves are underexposed, and they look blacker than they actually are on film. And so this is kind of a historical problem that it needs some delicate discussion around, not because I'm impacted or necessarily because Hoyte van Hoytema and his team did something wrong, but because there's a whole world of context that you have to understand. I don't know that they necessarily didn't intend to underexpose him. But to me, the reason I think he was underexposed is because I'm looking at the relative actors in that scene. I'm looking at Robert Pattinson. He looks perfectly exposed. I can see him in full three-dimensional. His shadow looks perfectly fine. I can see his face and the details in his face perfectly fine, as opposed to the details sometimes in certain shots of John David Washington. You can't see those quite as well. And so in again, my amateur, mode, I'm thinking they maybe underexposed him, which is incredibly rare. And I'm very likely speaking out of ignorance, but I would not also at the same time blame a black person who goes to this movie and sees him underexposed and feel hurt like that. I could understand someone being like, man, I can't even see. And this is like a big deal. Like Christopher Nolan has a black actor who isn't incredibly well known. This is like a breakout opportunity for John David Washington, who is Denzel's son, who is obviously well known. But there's not that many A-list black actors who get this kind of opportunity. This is incredibly rare to have an original film about a guy, a spy, an agent who's dealing with time travel. And there's all these elements that are really fucking cool. And to me, it's a little disappointing that you can't see him as well as you can see some of his white counterparts. And I just think that's worth noting. And maybe this has been addressed somewhere and he's like, no, this is just the tone of the film that we were going for. Because he doesn't even have a name. We want him to be a little shady and without texture. And maybe that's the case. I'm sure there's a great artistic argument for it. I just wanted to throw it out there as a point of concern from my perspective. And that's not something I generally, harp on or look to, be divisive about, but maybe worth thinking about and arguing the counterpoint. Like, why would they have done that intentionally? And I think that's an interesting idea, is they didn't give this guy a name. He is just a protagonist, and maybe there's just more to him than meets the eye. And so we wanted to visually, keep him a little bit darker and in the shadow. Maybe I think it's worth a discussion, I guess, is my big point.
I'm interested in that. That's weird. I didn't quite notice that, but now I want to see it a third time. I'm afraid if I see it a third time, that's going to be all I see.
Yeah, right.
Interesting.
Yeah. Going into like the storytelling and the writing, before I get into what I consider to be all my issues with the film, I thought we could start at the beginning when it opens on this opera house, right? There's this concert job that's kind of underway. And I found it interesting and really confusing the first 2 times I watched it. He slams it, like the concert's about to start, the conductor is getting ready, and right before he begins, a shot rings out. These, whoever, terrorists or whatever they're supposed to be, storm the stage, and like they abuse the instruments, man. Like they slam the cello, then the next guy stomps it, like breaks it. And I was really confused because that's such a specific image and it's so detailed. It doesn't feel happenstance. And the best I can come up with is maybe that was Nolan's way of saying he's ditching classical scores for this film. Like, don't expect classical instrumentation.
Hans ain't scoring this one.
Hans isn't involved. And
yeah,
we're doing something else. And of course, at this point, we've already ramped up this heavy rhythmic electronic beat. That's dope. I mean, it's a fun, score to me. I really enjoy it. But then I also thought it was interesting that we cut to the parking lot, right? And the Russians like wake up the Americans in the back. This is where Protagonist does this very curious thing that I think is very telling and a key to everything we're going to be talking about later on. And which is he ejects a bullet from his gun chamber and he catches it. That's so significant. And I think it's alluding to the fact that none of the guns in this film go off. Nolan, as opposed, normally we're loading the gun. I think Christopher Nolan is unloading the gun. And I found that very, very interesting thematically. Because ultimately this movie is about the bomb that never goes off. Right at the very end, the very last thing we hear is no one cares about the bomb that didn't go off. And this movie, I think, is a voice in the desert that's kind of hoping to stave off our self-destruction. And this is an attempt to get us to not detonate ourselves. And I think that's kind of what he's aiming at. And you can kind of maybe even see that with the usage of the cyanide tab. When the protagonist takes it, right, he's trying to kill himself and thereby protect his colleagues. It's noble. This is self-sacrifice, his attempt to help everyone and help the world by killing and self-sacrificing himself, as opposed to Sator. Sator tries to take that same cyanide tab in order to kill himself and humanity. It's selfish. And so, maybe the question that the film is, lightly posing is which one are we? Are we willing to sacrifice ourselves for the sake of others, or will we selfishly take everyone down with us? Because this is ultimately a film about us battling against our future selves. It's the idea that we're destroying the planet, and there's a light. I think it's a light. Eco-friendly, message that's taking place. If you consider the rest of the elements, like the wind turbines in the middle of the ocean, they're a very cool thing to shoot, and they're very cinematic. But it's also interesting that it's clean energy. It's where our guy goes, the protagonist goes while he's waiting, to pick up his real assignment to begin his Tenet tour, so to speak. And I also think it's interesting the use of nuclear energy. I don't know that they really make an opinion on nuclear energy. To me, nuclear in this context is very interesting because there's 2 ways to take it. Nuclear can be incredibly destructive, or it can be incredibly clean. Whenever you think about, clean energy, nuclear is actually very, very good, compared to a lot of the other things that we're using right now. But in the same way, it can be used to our ultimate destruction, right? When you start thinking about the atomic bombs and atomic detonations. And so it's an incredibly divisive and powerful tool that can be used for good or bad. And I find it interesting that the entire crux of this movie kind of revolves around nuclear physics in some capacity. And so let's dive in, I guess, to some of my issues. For one, the thing that I don't usually expect going into a Nolan film is that this one felt pretty predictable after a certain point. like there's flashbacks, and what we realize very soon is that flashbacks are actual foreshadowing. Because in a movie about time travel, there is no flashbacks. It's your future. Like, this is what you're going to be seeing. And so we're never really surprised by finding out anything. Even the fact that, you know, we're victorious is kind of pointed out halfway through the film in a conversation between Neil and the protagonist. He's like, isn't the very fact that we're having this conversation, that we're going, an indication that we're victorious? And they kind of, you know, try to spin that off, to say, well, we don't, I mean, you could say that, but at the same time, we don't know the effect of parallel universes or multiple timeline theory and et cetera. So they do their best to kind of, you know, wind that clock back up, but, you know, we're
Cat's out of the bag.
It really is. And we're not surprised when she's the woman diving off the boat that she fantasized about being. That becomes pretty obvious very, very quickly. Almost as the words are coming out of her mouth, you're realizing, oh yeah, that's probably her. And Neil, right, is the one who dies saving the protagonist at the end. There's very little shock in that. We kind of pieced that together pretty quickly. And maybe the least surprising of all is the fact that the protagonist is fighting himself in that hallway fight sequence at the airport. And so that kind of hurts the heart, like, to know what's going to happen before it happens. And I don't care who you are. You don't know, other than this, you don't predict Christopher Nolan films, not his original films, not the Inceptions and, you know, the Prestiges and, you know, Interstellars. Like, Memento, you don't predict what he's about to do to you. And so just from that level, that's a little bit of a surprise in this movie and somewhat of a letdown. I think another issue with this film that I had was it was so exposition heavy. Like, and not all of the exposition felt incredibly necessary to the inner workings of the film. For an example, the heist setup, the whole plan is very explanatory. The whole heist setup plan is very explanatory, but with little purpose to it. And it felt like the kind of thing that they could have just jumped straight into without necessarily letting us know. We could have figured it out on the way.
Out of everything you're going to explain, you don't need, that's like, you don't need to explain that. Explain like what that's going on everywhere else.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I get it.
Because you're introducing characters that ultimately don't mean anything. Like, I love the, you know, circling back to some of his favorite actors and all that, but he didn't add anything to the rest of the story. There was no reason to have him in there in the first place. And so their goal, and this is the other thing that kind of confused me, their goal was to steal the Goya fake as kind of an in with Sator. But they were also looking for inversion equipment, I guess. For some reason that kind of eludes me. I don't really know why they were looking for inversion equipment there. There was nothing in the Sir Michael conversation that told them to go to that airport in the first place. Instead, it was a conversation about, you need to go. This is another one of those expositional moments that I'm like, what are we really getting out of this? It felt like an excuse to go and hang out with Michael Caine, not necessarily something that added up to the world. And most of the exposition was like that. I felt like we're spending time learning backstory and trying to piece together this world that it was boring and it wasn't fun and it was hard to understand. And that is going to kind of lead me into my next, I don't know, topic, I guess. But the idea of there's simple stories and there's complex stories. And you don't tell one the same way you tell the other. So as, you know, a way to explain this perhaps complex film theory that I'm kind of inventing on the fly here, imagine the complexity of a plot is like a jigsaw puzzle. So imagine a jigsaw puzzle. And the more obscure your jigsaw puzzle picture, the bigger those pieces should be. You shouldn't like a Jackson Pollock, if that's if what you're trying to create, right? A Jackson Pollock puzzle picture should not have 10,000 pieces. That would be the worst puzzle in the world to put together, unless you're just a maniac who loves that kind of obscurity, you know, obscure bullshit. Instead, for a Jackson Pollock, you probably need fewer pieces than, say, the picture of a cow. A picture of a cow is probably going to be a little bit more satisfying on a 10,000 piece level or 1,000 piece level, as opposed to Jackson Pollock, maybe like 20 pieces. Like that, that's so weird and so many. It's so hard to understand what you're putting together that you need those pieces to be a little bit bigger. And so I think with a movie, the more simplistic the plot, the less that you need to explain it for the audience to be able to grasp it. And that adds a layer of enjoyability to the film whenever it's this very simple thing, but you have to work for it as an audience member to understand why people are doing what they're doing. Like if it's a bank robbery, you don't really need to explain, hey, we're about to rob a bank. Instead, all you really need to do is put the audience in a car with these people who aren't talking to each other, that are, looking, and they're loading weapons. And you're like, oh, we're in a car, we're loading weapons. Okay. And then they throw masks on their head and you're like, oh, they're about to rob something. I wonder if it's a bank robbery. They pull up to a bank. Fuck. Okay. They're about to rob a bank. And you start, and that's easy. That's a very simple picture to paint. If you're going to explain, something that simple, making the audience work for it is a satisfying experience because now you're making them ask themselves questions. But if you're going to tell something complex, like entropy, which is one of the most complex things you can ask an audience member to understand in science on a basic fundamental level, this is the hardest part. This is the hardest thing to understand. And asking a casual moviegoer you shouldn't even be using, in this plot of this movie, you shouldn't even be saying the word entropy. It's so meaningless that you're not helping your story. You're not helping your plot. You're only confusing people further. And if you need to just use basic time theory principles that we've heard 1,000 times from 1,000 other movies, because your movie is already so complex that you need to simplify it by making it easy to reference and understand. And so the more complex it is, the more you should lean towards over-explaining and making the exposition fun and connected to the details. For instance, in this movie, in Tenet, a good example of this is the bullet demo, right? He shows us the bullet, how it works, how it doesn't, and then he showed us with a video replay right there as Barbara, I think played by Clemens Posey, is demonstrating him catching the bullet, and she explains to him, you need to have dropped it first. And so he works through the motions of dropping it in reverse, and the bullet kind of sucks up into his hand, and it's like, okay. And then she replayed it in forwards and backwards to help him understand the bullet doesn't understand backwards and forwards. It just understands its own direction in time. And so it's like, okay. And that works. A bad example of this is what I was talking about a minute ago with the blue team is inverted at the end and the red team is moving forwards. What? Like what I think they probably could have done was to have a smaller example of that, of a pincer move in a smaller scaled down version. Let's have a 3-person scene where Neil is inverted and the protagonist is moving forward and they're attacking Sator, like just by themselves, or attacking his bodyguard. Let's see what a pincer move looks like on this very small scale. And now we can see what the ramifications are, what we're looking at. We're able to recognize what this person is doing and how it's affecting, the protagonist while he's moving and operating. We need to see these things work on a small scale. You can't just go straight to these big demonstrations and expect us to follow along. It just does not work. And I think he tried his best to demonstrate these things, and maybe not his best, but he tried to demonstrate these things in other levels. But the way that we were witnessing it was just too confusing. Like the forwards backwards scene with with Sator shooting Cat. Because you can't focus on what anyone's saying because you have him speaking in regular and then immediately followed by him speaking inverted, and it just becomes impossible to focus. I felt like I needed a shot of Ritalin or something.
Dude, yeah. And the mix, it was just so hard to hear what he was saying too, because they were overlapping, like you said. It's like, shit. One needs to... at least level it better so I can hear him. So,
Right.
anyway.
Help me focus on what you're wanting me to focus on, instead of just kind of throwing me into this world. And so for me, but I think the biggest sin, one of the biggest sins in this movie was that the exposition was both boring and confusing. You can't really do both, and you can't do it for extended amounts of time. And he did all of that. And because of that, all those reasons, we can't really enjoy the moments of awe when we're confused about what we're seeing. We just needed a better demonstration and a much more simplified version of it to make it very firm and graspable. And there's other moments that I think are fun that work when we start talking about the layers that, if you think about it in hindsight, are really fun. They're not as fun because of all the other confusion. We're not able to appreciate these ironic moments that happen in the film because of everything is already so confusing. And I think these moments work if this rest of the movie wasn't confusing, but because everything was confusing, we needed these moments of irony to be more properly set up for us to appreciate and be aware that they're happening. And so to put some meat on the bones here, when the boat scene, when Cat like rips off his, lifeline and shoves him out of the boat or whatever, Sator is drowning and he's been knocked unconscious. The protagonist jumps in to save him. And what we don't know, the irony, the dramatic irony that's taking place there, well, it's not dramatic, it's just irony in hindsight, is that he's not just saving Sator, he's saving humanity. Because if Sator dies, all of humanity is linked to his destruction, because of the linking of his watch to the bomb, at least the pieces of the bomb that he's already concocted. And likewise, we don't understand that Cat not killing Sator twice, by the way, in the boat, and then of course with her gun that the protagonist gave her, she pulls it on him right as they're looking through all these weapons, and she ends up not being able to kill him. But we don't appreciate that her not killing him also means that she's not killing humanity, because those moments, that explanation hasn't happened yet. It doesn't happen until much later in the film, so there's no setting up of the things that give us appreciation for the moments that we're witnessing. And so the setups aren't there, therefore the payoffs are also not there. And which kind of puts us into the final phase of the mission here, which is he sets up a lot of rules to be broken that we never really break. And I think it was done by intention, but I think it was a mistake personally. This goes into loading the gun theory. This is something we talk about a lot on the show, which is if you load a gun, we want to see the gun go off. If you have a bomb, or you throw a grenade, or a character promises vengeance on another character, you want to see these elements come to pass in one form or another. Either they need to be addressed, and here they're not really. In a way that's satisfying. There's no emotional satisfaction in this movie. In an action film, you need one of the two, man. It's either got to be emotionally satisfying, or it needs to be, physically, or, this sense of awe. The action itself needs to be fulfilling and satisfying. So for instance, Sator, right, threatens to kill the protagonist in this really excruciating detail, right? He's going to stuff his balls into a slit throat and watch him choke on it. That's the idea of this really drug out. And of course, that never happens. And we never see anybody, suffer that kind of fate, which, don't get me wrong, I'm okay with. It's not something I actually want to see, but it was a threat that became empty. Similar with empty threats, he loads his belt, right? Sator pulls his belt off and loads the cufflinks in there. He's going to beat his wife. And of course, she defuses that. And even worse, this is the worst sin to me, is he sets up a rule. With time travel movies, you're always setting up rules. How does this universe work? What are the consequences of, the universe that you're constructing? And one of the biggest rules he sets up is that if you touch yourself, if your skin touches, the inverted self with the forward moving self, you'll explode. It's annihilation. And we never see that demonstrated. That might have been a good opportunity for Sator to, kill himself. But maybe that's too obvious and too done or whatever. But it's a rule that was set up that we never break. And in a similar way, I never feel like whenever we're introduced to the idea of Tenet and the hand signal, what the warning is, it'll open up the right doors and also some of the wrong ones too. It never really opens up the wrong ones. I don't think, at best, you can say Priya was the wrong door, but that still had its utility. That still had a part to play. So I wouldn't say that was the wrong door. We also have a bomb that's built to destroy everything in going backwards in time, which is an interesting idea, because if an inverted bomb is going backwards through time, and then that to me also means for that to work for the future people, they've begun inverting themselves and inverting their world at that point in time. So they're able to kind of move back through time and live that direction or something. I don't know. It was an interesting idea. Ultimately, there's no payoff there. And I think going back to where we started, I think that was his intention with the setup of watching him unload a gun at the very beginning before his first mission. I think he was making a commentary that he understands he's unloading the gun and that he's going to have a bunch of empty threats that never come to pass. And I think that was his intention. Unfortunately, it made for an immensely unsatisfying film in a lot of ways. That's not to say this movie doesn't have some fun to it. I enjoy it. I think what I think is going to happen is in 2 to 3 years, this will become a bit of a cult classic. This will be a movie that ages very well. It's not something that, like you were saying, Todd, that, the first viewing, brutal. You're going to be really unhappy that first viewing. But if you watch it again and then watch it again, there are moments of payoff. Unfortunately, there's also a lot of moments of, tedium that goes along with that. But if you wanted to chop this down from a 2.5 hour movie down to like an hour 45, just shy of 2 hours, I think you have something that really hums along. I would have, if I was, the half the genius of Nolan stepping in to give him tips, I would have said, you know what, we need to collapse some of these moments of exposition into more fun moments. Either we need to have a better reason to hang out with Priya, because that's where a lot of the exposition happens, is with her. We need to have a better experience with her doing something. The best that he could do is kind of just have us walking around in different locations. And that was literally the best that he could come up with. And that should say a lot about those moments. Because if you think back and I meant to add a spoiler on top of the Tenet spoiler, we're not going to get crazy, but it helps to compare this to Inception. So a spoiler alert for Inception. Pause and go watch and listen to that or whatever. But just if you haven't seen Inception, which I would be surprised if you're watching Tenet, having not seen that, but go watch Inception and come back. But what made the exposition in Inception so satisfying is we're watching these elements play out in a world as you're learning how the dream sequences work. You're watching how those rules get broken and what the consequences are. And it adds to the tension and adds to the rest of the film and your understanding and your ability to experience all these moments that come after. When we're getting exposition from Priya, it's just background on all the players in the world. Like who's in the future and what are they, who's their Oppenheimer and what is she doing and why is she sacrificing herself? And it doesn't matter that much. It doesn't really help us understand the world that much better to enjoy this movie. I think those are the kinds of things that if you wanted to incorporate, you should have made that. Maybe Priya should have been the inventor. Maybe she should have been the character who was coming back in time to try to undo her work. Maybe, and that's kind of my first time watching this, I thought, oh, we're going to meet the inventor of this, whatever it was, the algorithm that could, destroy, the universe or whatever. There was just a lot of clunkiness to it. And to make matters worse, it's one thing to make it explanation or exposition boring and, clunky. the bigger sin was they also made it really hard to comprehend on a fundamental English speaking level. Like, it was too clever. There were too much cross talking. It was too low tone of voice. It tried to feel too self-important to some degree. And you were, at that point, you began asking too much over the audience. You needed to kind of shout it from the rooftops because of the level of complexity. You should have been making it hit you over the head obvious, as opposed to let's make it clever on top of being complex.
The whole Michael Caine scene was just a mess to me. It was like so purposeless, and like mentioning these people's names. This guy and Sator and so, and then in the same breath mentioning Shipley's, like, we're all supposed to know what that is, you know, like if you're not like super learned or like have heard of it, or, you know, in passing at some point in your life, you're not going to know at all what that is. And then all of a sudden he's like watching her. It's like literally that's the cut, you know. There's like very little, you're right, there's very little purpose to the explanation. I mean, yeah, one of the wonderful things, I'm glad you brought up Inception, about that is like like you said, we're watching the exposition happen. So like if this film is really about entropy and the reversal of entropy, just, you know, pour cream into coffee and show it go in reverse, you know, or like, you know, tell him, okay, now reverse that, or, you know, like whatever. At least I'm watching it happen. You're explaining to me, an ignorant person that has never heard of entropy before, what that is. If you feel the need to bring it up and use the word entropy, because for a while, even when I had heard of it, I still didn't really understand it or know what it was, because we only have the concept of time going in one direction. And like, you know, we talk about time travel, but we don't talk about reversing the direction of time as we move forward. Like that's another level above entropy. Entropy is like everything turning around and going backwards, right? But they're talking about there are some things that are going backwards while we are still going forwards. Like it's a whole different thing. And just seeing a bullet rise up into someone's hand does not tell me that bullet is traveling backwards in time, because you're telling me it is. You know, it doesn't explain to me that. So I totally get that.
Yeah, it was very messy, and I think this movie probably need a massive overhaul from every facet. Maybe from a framework, it works in terms of there's a guy who's trying to stop a madman from killing himself and the universe, and we're inserting this idea of reversal time travel. Very cool. On a fundamental framework, I think that still works. But the rest of this movie felt like a lot of busy work. We're just kind of jumping to and from locations for the sake of jumping to and from, of following a rabbit trail. We're chasing the white rabbit to some degree, and it just felt breathless. And there's things that are thrown out that don't make a lot of sense, or that we don't have any buy-in, and has no payoff. Like the idea that he's supposed to be acting as a billionaire, that kind of gets thrown out by, you know, Michael Caine, and it gets abandoned pretty quick. Like no one buys it, and it's never a thing. There's just a lot of fruitless exploration that it felt like it needed another set of eyes, and this would have been a good one, as you were saying, to bring in his brother to say, you got to bring the audience along a little bit cleaner. These ideas are amazing, but let's reframe it around a new story, because that's the other painful part, is we get to the very end and the emotional payoff isn't really there. I don't feel alleviated that Kat has, survived her abusive, maniac of a husband, and, has her kid. I get very little relief out of that. I get very little of, the protagonist killing Priya and her hitman. There's just, I don't leave this movie feeling anything other than, I guess, frustration, especially the first time. And even on repeated viewings, I still don't get those moments of elation, because I'm watching Kat kind of kill her husband, and I'm like, this feels irresponsible. This doesn't feel like the right thing that she should be doing for the greater good. So
she almost destroyed everyone.
Yeah. And then on top of that, and this is kind of an insult to injury from me, the scene where, you know, she slides him off the deck and into the water, that scene just does not work. You know, him kind of hitting the railing, and it doesn't look right. It might mechanically be accurate, but it looks a little silly, and I would have filmed that a little differently. I might have just, instead of seeing him slip and slide and bonk his head, I might have just shot it from underneath the water. I know it's a little more basic, but from underneath the water, seeing her begin to push him off the deck and then cut to under the water, him splashing down lifelessly. I think that's fine. It works, and it doesn't take me out of the movie and saying, oh, that looks silly. Because as silly as I might sound saying that, it's a practical reality whenever you're dealing with an audience. You have to make sure you never give them a reason to eject from the suspension of disbelief. And so I think there's some misstep on the directing part.
Well, it's a really good point, because the other thing is that Nolan he's not gory.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a pretty gory shot. It was like, like the way he bent was, it was obviously a dummy, but I'm just saying, like, if I'm imagining a real person, and that's pretty gory, it's pretty brutal. And I just have never known him to be that way. So that shot did feel out of place.
I will say, and this will be my last note, and I want to get to the question that you had at the beginning.
All right.
But one thing I want to end on a good note, because there's one thing he did in this that I actually really love, which is the fight sequence between the protagonist and himself in the outpost, or whatever the airport was. This was really clever, because if you understand what's happening on both iterations, from both perspectives, it makes so much sense. From the perspective the first time around, whenever he begins that fight sequence, he's losing. He's getting his ass beat by the inverted man. And it takes him a little while to get used to fighting the inverted man, and then he starts whooping his ass. So there's a learning curve that's happening on both ends of this fight. Because if you invert it and you go back and you're on the second half as the inverted man going through, at first you're getting your ass kicked. You don't know how to fight as an inverted person yet. And so it takes you halfway into the fight before you get the upper hand. You start learning, oh, this is how it operates now. And you start beating his ass. So as you're getting better, the other person is getting worse. And so the upper hand switches midway through that fight, and it makes complete logical sense, and it works on a mechanical level pretty well. And I think it's a very intelligent framework to take into that action sequence. And so I thought that was just, brilliant. And part of me wonders if he spent too much time drawing up some of these moments and not enough time thinking through the story elements. I think that's probably what happened. He got lost in the details of the sequences instead of losing himself in the storytelling macro level view. Yeah.
I totally agree. I mean, the brain function that you have to have, not just as a director, but as a producer, to make sure that these shots work with each other is just I can't comprehend it still after watching it twice. I'm sure it all makes sense, but there's so much of it that I just, if I wrote it, would take me forever to figure it out, to get it right. You know what I mean? So yeah, I think that he definitely went down a rabbit hole in so many of these scenes to get it, to seem that way, to be that way. Yeah. Right. It just, I could only imagine what writing the script was like. Like that had to be, I can only imagine what doing a shot list would be like for this film. Just that. And
I'm pretty confident he spent a lot of time with the actors getting them to learn how to move backwards for certain sections.
Yeah.
Like there's a scene where, they're inverted and they're running into the airport with Kat on the stretcher, right? And we're seeing everything reverse. When in reality, how they shot that, right, is probably in reverse. Like they shot them running backwards so that, and they have to rehearse. They have to rehearse what your body looks like running forwards and how to emulate that backwards. And there's several scenes like that, and it works really, really well. There's a scene where he's doing pull-ups on the ship, and we're going backwards. I was
going to say that. Yeah, it's great.
He kills it because he has to walk down the stairs backwards and walk backwards up to the pull-up bar and then turn around and do pull-ups. And luckily the pull-ups look probably the same whether you're going forwards or backwards, but he has to execute that while there's a helicopter move. Like that's intense, man.
Yeah. It's awesome. So I mean,
cool.
The way they did the reverse stuff, I would like to have seen more of people going in reverse so that they're going forward. I would like to have seen that more, even like, but I like that kind of stuff. Yeah. Like I can tell when they're going, whatever, but I just love like the practicality of it. Right now I'm watching the Star Wars saga with my son. He's like so into it, dude. Like he was so sad that he couldn't watch one tonight. He was crying, but we're only through the first 3 and he's like in it, bro. He's in it.
That's
which,
so cool.
I'm glad he likes the first 3 because we're gonna go down a freaking rabbit hole. But my point is that just like watching those at least the first 2, everything is so practical except all the stuff that was added in, later in the 2000s. It's so practical. It was just so beautifully done. I don't care if I know that it's a puppet. It's like it's the effort that I can see. It's so great. Okay, so I was going to ask you 2 things, really. The first thing is, did you catch at the end, they're like, not that I think there will be a sequel, but the possibility of maybe a sequel of them saying it's, we're going through this whole thing is one big pincer move and we're only halfway through it. And
I thought about that.
It was just like, and then they split up the algorithm. They don't destroy it, for whatever reason. Why wouldn't you destroy this thing? I don't know.
I thought a lot about that one. The best I could come up with is that it does contain like nuclear Pu-241, which is, highly radioactive. And so maybe it's a concern for if in order to destroy it, they would have to involve more people. And I don't know. But
here's the thing. Only one piece had the 241 because it was just like a quarter of a kilo. Remember that was stolen. So it was just like a little bit and it was just one. So just destroy one of the pieces. Like, I don't get it.
And we're done. Yeah.
And we're done. The second thing is that I don't understand the bomb situation. So I would need you to explain it to me because the whole thing, I don't understand why they need to stop a bomb. And this is why, because in order to do a pincer move on something like a bomb going off, that means that a team had to like let it happen and go forward and then come backwards. Does that make sense? The blue team going in reverse had to go to 5 hours ahead or whatever, past when the bomb was going to go off and then come backwards. If they couldn't go past where it went off because then they would already be going backwards because entropy would be reversed. Right? Am I wrong?
So that's an interesting question. It's very interesting. And that might go back to the whole grandfather paradox that they kind of threw out there. But I will say, I believe they always intended for that bomb to go off. That was a part of their fake out. They said that we want them to believe that we're trying to prevent the bomb from going off. And that's a distraction while the Splinter team goes in to actually remove the actual, problem child, the nuclear bomb.
The algorithm.
Yeah, the algorithm.
Oh.
And so the nice thing about that big bomb going off up top was that it was going to bury, and this was their intention from the beginning. They wanted to bury that bomb in order to give it back to the future people. That was their drop, the dead drop, that they were trying to pass things off to the people of the future. And by delivering that to them, that would be, I don't know. I feel like I just lost myself because the goal was for him to kill himself and also the rest of the world.
But how is setting off a bomb gonna activate the algorithm?
I think the bomb detonating let's look at it from Sator's point of view.
Yes.
His goal was to bury the algorithm so that nobody could touch it before he decided to detonate it. And so he had his people like, hey, go deliver this payload. And he probably lied or whatever. I don't think is covered in the movie. But his people are executing his plan of go bury this bomb at the dead drop. And in his mind, he's thinking, and then I'm going to kill all of y'all are about to die. And so from his minions standpoint, they're just trying to bury this bomb and detonate it so that no one can access it. This will be lost forever to everyone for all intents and purposes. And so our team is going through, they want to make believe that, yeah, we're trying to prevent this bomb, but we're going to send a splinter team to go recover the algorithm and still let the bomb go off. And so that no one is tempted to go and explore or whatever. They won't find anything anyway, but they will leave us alone and we can make our escape with them thinking that they've won. And so they don't need a total victory. They just need for their plan to go off without continuing a fight, so to speak. Beyond that, I got nothing. Like, I don't know.
I still don't get it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I still, what does a bomb have to do with it? I get, okay, you're going to bury it so nobody today finds it and then the future people find it. But what's the point of a bomb? I guess to kill everybody, but that's there so nobody knows where it is. But
because he's got all these dead drops really set up all over the world, I guess.
And then how did the protagonist know where? He said they said Neil said asked him where it was when they were on the boat, and he said, you don't need to know that. Like, he's keeping it close to the chest.
That kind of
so he knew where.
Yeah, that brings up, I think, the bigger issue, storytelling mechanics wise. This whole movie is built on a paradox. Because the protagonist is the one who recruits Neil, but in reality, the protagonist recruits himself into the process because this whole thing is already underway whenever he joins in. And so there's a causality issue at the heart of it. And if he was going to make a sequel, which I would be highly surprised if this got greenlit for a sequel, based on how it's not going to perform, then that would be where he would need to follow up and explain the mechanics of how this mission begins when in fact its creator is brought into it midway.
Well, I think he says, it feels like he says things, he's saying multiple times that he doesn't believe in the grandfather paradox, where he thinks that, like,
the protagonist is saying that.
Yeah, the protagonist. You can go back in time and kill your grandfather and everything's okay because it just starts another timeline. Because of the paradox of him recruiting himself into something that didn't exist before, and then at the end of the people letting the bomb explode and the algorithm get buried 5 hours from now and then going backwards, that place shouldn't be there if the nuclear bomb actually went off. So
I think by the logic of this world, it's all circular. It's all time happens because it happens, not necessarily because there is causality at stake. I think that's kind of the argument, because that's how, Kat saw herself diving in the first place. Because that moment for her hadn't happened yet, hadn't triggered. And so I think that's kind of their excuse is time happens because it happens, not because there's any, button pusher. And in that way, I feel like, and I mentioned this after the first time I watched it, I think there's some kinship with T.H. White's The Once and Future King, This is a story about King Arthur, and in T.H. White's version, Merlin is going backwards through time. And so the first time he meets King Arthur in the book, King Arthur's meeting him for the first time, but for Merlin, this is a goodbye. This isn't a hello and a greeting. And so it's perspective shifting. And so I felt, and the reason I bring that up is I remember the first time I read that in freshman English, my teacher said, before we ever opened the book, he's like, okay, we're about to encounter a character, and here's what's happening. He's going backwards through time. No, he doesn't talk backwards. No, he doesn't walk backwards. He just is. And it's not going to pay off for you to think too hard about it. He's like, it's just going to hurt yourself. Don't do it. Just understand that's what's happening and let it go. And so in that way, I think Christopher Nolan is wanting us to let go. And I think he says as much a few times in the movie, like, don't think about it too much. Like, that's what Neil's character says.
But you can't give me all the shit you give me in this movie and make me think so fucking hard and then tell me to let go.
Yeah.
Like, sorry about it, man.
Yeah.
If you're going to explain everything else ad nauseum and make it like, try to pull me along with you, then you gotta also expect that I'm going to ask these questions at the end about how they go past the bomb and then come back. Like, that shouldn't, it should be explained, or at least give me a theory.
Yeah.
Give me your theory. So
that's the pain of writing a movie with so many details, is because once you open up that box, you're right. He owes it. He owes you more answers and more explanation. And so, I mean, maybe it's there and we just missed it. But to be fair, there's a lot there.
Yeah, I mean, between the two of us, we've seen it 5 times, and we're still, answerless on a lot of things, and not in a good way. Yeah, so, I mean, like I said, to end this really quickly, because this has been a long one, right. It's always an experience going to see a Nolan film. Anything the man puts out, I'm going to go and see, and I'm going to try to like. Like, that's the thing. It's like, it's not that I want to shit on it.
No, not at all.
I want to like it.
Yeah, we walk into this movie expecting something that we love, and to walk out excited about, and everyone does. That's the fun thing. The one thing that worries me about this movie is I hope this doesn't prevent him from, he's almost all we have when it comes to big budget sci-fi original films. He's not adapting anybody else's book or anybody else's ideas. These are just his pure ideas. And it would really hurt my heart to see, they spent, however much money in Hollywood. His Warner Brothers is no longer going to let him, create movies of this caliber.
They'll find another.
I would hope. I would hope he's got enough, in the tank, historically, that people are like, yeah, you know what? You can fail a few more times and we'll be okay with that. I'm curious about that.
What I'd like to see from him, is something like Tenet, but on a small scale. Like, so he's gone so big. What if you go tiny? Like, the complete opposite direction, whatever that means. Could mean physical, it could mean emotional, it could mean whatever. I don't know. But he's done everything from take us to other galaxies, to other times, to within our dreams, to like all these places. It's like, these are all wonderful places, and I can't wait to see what's next. But if you're going to write this yourself, like you said earlier, let's get back to brass tacks. Let's get back to story writing, man, because you can, you can write the most complex film. This is literally the most complex film I think I might have ever seen. I can't think of another one that's more complex.
Primer, the only one I would say that's around this. I don't know if you've ever seen Primer. Right. The super low budget. And I was going to recommend it this week, but I've already recommended it before. That's the closest I can get. And this, to your point, is still much more convoluted and complicated.
Yeah. And then you have other films that are so simple. They're about one thing, and you don't have you're not spoon fed anything or taken out of the film in any way, and it's all very focused on one thing. And I can think of probably 5 off the top of my head that are just fantastic, that are timeless, that I love, and I walk out like buried by, and they're so simple. And I just think, like, if he can do so much with so much, imagine what he could do if it just was focused on one thing. Him and his brother. It's like I was telling you before we started this recording, like, I think I'm a decent writer, but when I send a track to Scott, to my old guitarist, it's like I didn't even write the song at all. It's like I only had the bones, and he filled it in with the flesh when he tracks his guitar on it. And I have a guy that I feel like that about, and I work with him. We sold some songs, and I'm going to pay him for it. And if we don't sell the songs, then we're just writing music together, and it's fine. But if we make money, then he gets it too. And I feel like he should. I mean, maybe this was a pet project of his he'd had for a long time, and he just wanted to do it himself. And I get that, and he has enough clout to do that. But man, you and your brother work fantastically together. He is the story guy. You are the idea guy, and he takes it and he makes it digestible. And I just would recommend that because I know you're listening, Chris. I just recommend that, you just go back to working with him, man. I think that he brings the best out of you, and you bring the best out of him. And it just so happens that you're brothers. I mean, why not, continue that professional relationship when everyone loves everything you guys both do. So, what you said.
No, absolutely. And part of me wonders, and I feel like this is coming from my own ego, my id, that there is something addictive, and I'm speaking again from my perspective, about having at the end in the titles, the first thing that pops up on screen, it says written and directed by your name. And in order to get that written and directed by, not just directed by, but written and directed, you have to do everything. You have to come up with the story. And that's not to say you can't soundboard and, get feedback, but you can't bring anyone else into the writer's room. You got to write the script yourself. And that's part of the labor of getting all the credit.
I would hope that he wouldn't do that shit.
I would hope so too. I mean, he's certainly shared credit, in past films. But yeah, I would hope that he's, he cares more about telling a good story than he does about having his ego fed with written and directed by. But
yeah, I mean, it's because it's one thing, bro. It's one thing for you who maybe on a big screen, if you maybe you haven't seen that on a big screen and you want that experience in your life. That's one thing. And you've worked really hard on it and you've spent years on it and stuff like that. And it's your baby and you've never made a feature length film and you want that experience, but you just can't get this last, scene to work and you really want to hand it off to somebody. You're like, F that. No way. I'm finishing this. I get that. Yeah. And you know what? More power to you. It's another thing if you've had multiple blockbuster, timeless films that everyone loves. And you have done this before and you have seen your name up there before to do that. So I totally get that. And maybe that's what happened. And that would be the saddest part about it because I think that this had so much legs and so much potential.
But you're right. He has nothing left to prove. And so I wouldn't imagine that was where his mind goes. But again,
you never know.
Perspective.
Dude, thank you for making it because you never know. And maybe it was. And maybe even for him, like I said, maybe he wrote most of it and he just was so done with it that he didn't want to do it anymore. And so he's just like, nope, we're making it as is. Yeah. Made a call. Who knows?
Yeah.
I don't know.
The studio, Warner Brothers might come and say, hey, we want to release this, in the summer of 2020. We need you to get on the ball. And at a certain point, you have to start making things and locking a script, even if you don't feel like it's ready. I don't know if he would operate that way, but sometimes to keep the ability to have favor with your studio, I can imagine you make some compromises every once in a while. I mean, I'm sure he's made films that he wasn't crazy about making, but I feel like he did Batman just as a way to get to make Inception and The Prestige, and that gave him a lot of weight and favor with the studio system. Anyway, so I think we've beat down on our favorite director long enough.
Yeah.
What are you going to recommend this week?
That hurt. Yeah. So, I had it, and then it disappeared. Where was it? Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna recommend a different a movie that kind of did this, but did it in a not a time sort of way, but in a just a totally different way. That's just fantastic, and to this day is one of my favorite movies that does this kind of thing. It's kind of like filling in puzzle pieces. Can you guess it?
The Game.
No.
Oh, okay.
Memento.
Memento.
I loved that film. I thought it was really heady, but not so heady that I didn't get it. And I thought the acting was fantastic. Just the concept of it was really great, especially for the time. I think that since then, a lot of stuff has been done to maybe water it down. So maybe if you hadn't seen it yet, and you're seeing it for the first time, it might feel dated just because others have tried to copy it. But keep in mind when you watch it, this was one of the first times that this concept was really done to this level of production. I can't think of anything before that really, came close to painting it in that large of a light. So yeah, Memento.
Agreed. Great recommendation. And if you've never seen Following, because Memento is what put me on to Nolan. I was like, oh my God, what did I just watch? And then immediately I think I tracked down the movie that allowed him to make Memento, which was Following. And maybe at some point we'll do that in the not too distant future. We'll probably do both. We're trying to save some Nolan up, but we'll get to it. I'm going to recommend a Tony Scott film starring Robert Redford and Brad Pitt. It's called Spy Game. And so with spy films and espionage, it's always, this world of confusion and like what's happening, and there's layers of competing interests at stake. And in Tenet, as we've, belabored, it doesn't really come through not just all the stakes, but all the what the hell is happeningness of it all. And so I think with Spy Game, it kind of does a similar thing, except all the pieces are there and they're easier to grasp, and there's some more aha moments. Now, I'm not saying it's the greatest movie ever made. I personally really love that movie, though. I love everyone in it. I love all the performances. I love the stakes and the payoffs. I just think it's a really wonderful movie that no one ever thinks about. And I do want to cover it at some point in the future, but we'll get to that. There's a lot of Tony Scott left to cover as well. Oh, yeah. And so, yeah, go watch Spy Game if you have never seen that. And stay tuned for next week when we tackle the actual apocalypse. What they couldn't do in Tenet, they achieve in I Am Legend. Like, we end the world. Mm-hmm. And so stay tuned next week when we cover that. And don't forget to subscribe. Leave us a note if you want us to talk about a thing or a movie. We did get a request for Memento, which we will get to probably before the end of the year as I continue working on my first big script, which we'll talk about in a couple weeks. Not next week, but we'll talk about it the week after. We're doing a temporal pincer move on the podcast. If y'all didn't know,
yeah, we are.
We already recorded next week's episode and we're attacking it from the other side. So stay tuned to hear a little bit more about my adventures in that. But if you want to leave us a comment about why you loved or hated or think, we're wrong about Tenet, you can do that at thepestlepodcast.com/Tenet.
And I love this quote. We're going to leave you with a quote from Alfred Hitchcock. Always make the audience suffer as much as possible. Check. No, I'm just kidding.
No,
I'm just kidding.
that's why I thought there's a great irony in there.
Yes,
you know,
yes.
just because I knew the way this conversation was going to go.
Yes, there was suffrage. However, it was, I mean, I think I enjoyed it more than you did. I just, maybe not, but I feel like you were more critical about the details than I was, but I mean, I enjoyed it. I would see it again. Just because I think I could see it 5 or 6 times and still not fully get it. So
yeah, no, in that way, I have albums that I listen to and that I love. Like my favorite album of all time, which you'll hear in 2 weeks as a recommendation. I've heard it, I don't know, 600 times maybe, and I don't know all the words, but I do it on purpose. And that makes it still fresh and interesting every time I listen to it, is because I don't know what's going to happen next.
you don't know the word.
Yeah, it's a rap album, and I purposely just kind of listen to what he's saying. And I think memorizing and learning a song comes through repetition, and I never try to get that repetition in. And so with this movie, I feel like I'll enjoy it. And you're right, man. I do enjoy it. And I do want to watch it again. Probably not for the reasons that maybe Nolan intended. But maybe he wanted to make a movie that was a little bit like a manual that you had to read over and over again to appreciate the finer workings of it. That would kind of surprise me, to be honest, but it works for me. Like, I don't mind having to learn a movie. When I watch Primer, I usually watch it 2 times in a row, because every time I watch it, it takes me watching it to understand what I'm watching.
I need to go watch that movie again.
Seriously, like, we'll be covering that within the next couple months.
Yeah, why haven't we done that? I think we brought it up. I think you in particular have brought it up 5 or 6 times.
Yeah, that's
maybe
probably
more.
True. That's a really inspirational movie for me, and I don't think I was saving it for this reason, but I'm going to use it for the reason of I'm going to want to do a series on first movies, like directors who made their mark with their first movie, and big breakout successes. And I want to do a series on that so that I can study and try to learn what are they doing that's working, and how can I learn from that whenever I go to make my first movie. And Primer is such a good example of that, and I'm hoping to start a series within the next several months where we are able to get on directors. I would love to have Shane Carruth on. Maybe not on the episode that we cover Primer, but maybe as a follow-up. Maybe we get him on as a follow-up after I've done my analysis and I've weighed in, and they can come in and say, no, you screwed it up. Here's what I was actually thinking. We did that shot because we ran out of time, not because it represented what you thought it represented.
Right.
But
I love that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, cool, man. This has been fun.
Same.
It was a little painful.
Yeah.
But it has to be done.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed all of your feedback and all of your thoughts on all this stuff. So thank you for that insight, man.
Thanks, man.
Absolutely. So, guys, thank you for going along this journey with us. Please join us next week. We're covering I Am Legend, so make sure to watch that before the episode drops. And like Wes said, leave us a review. Leave us a note. Tell us what you think, what you like, what you don't like. We read it all. So thank you very much for all of our supporters out there. We appreciate it. Until next week, I'm Todd.
I'm Wes.
Go watch some movies.